Hello and welcome back to St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. I'm Dave Palmer, and we are now at a very exciting part of the Summa because we have entered into the part of prima pars where we are going to now talk about human nature, the treatise on man, as it is called in the Summa. And remember, we started off with God, and we learned that God is our final end. Okay, we have a supernatural end. And then we learned about the Trinity, and then we went into the angels and a little bit more about creation. And that was all setting the stage because if God is our final end and the angels are close to God, they're spiritual, they don't have bodies, right? They're similar to God. Now we get into the part of the Summa that really the Summa is all about because the Summa was written for human beings, not for angels. And so now Thomas is really going to get into it. We're going to have about 6 videos, 6 lessons or so on human nature. So let's get right to it. And first thing you have to understand is when we talk about the nature of man, of course, Thomas, even though he's using the word man, is referring to men and women. Okay, so that's whenever we talk about mankind and that kind of thing, of course, we're talking about human nature in general, and that certainly does include women. All right, so you women out there can rest assured for that. All right, so the first question that Thomas asks in question number 75 of Prima Pars, article number 1, is he says, whether the soul is a body. Now, that may seem like a weird question because none of us probably think that our soul and our body is the same thing. But as he's going to explain, there's some confusion about this. First of all, let's talk about what kind of creatures have a soul. Now, if I put a picture up of a woman like this, you would probably say, yeah, of course, that woman has a soul, and any human being has a soul. That's kind of obvious, right? What about a bird? Does a bird have a soul? Well, St. Thomas Aquinas would say yes, a bird has a soul. A different kind of soul than we have, but a soul nonetheless. What about a rock? Does a rock have a soul? Thomas would say no, okay, for reasons that I'm going to explain here shortly. What about a rattlesnake? Yes, okay, for the same reason that the bird has a soul. Again, not going to get too much into it, but it does have a soul. A flower. Okay, here's a tulip. Does a tulip have a soul? Thomas would say yes. A tulip has a soul. A tree has a soul. Any kind of flower or bush or that kind of thing, right? And our good old friend the grasshopper, yes, has a soul. And then, interestingly, what about angels? Does an angel have a soul? Thomas says no, okay, because only something with a body can have a soul. Then why doesn't a rock have a soul? Well, it has a body. Here's the way that Thomas explains it. He said, to seek the nature of the soul, we must premise that the soul is defined as the first principle of life of those things which live. Okay, the rock doesn't live, it doesn't have life in it, right? For we call living things animate, that is, having a soul, and those things which have no life inanimate. Okay, a brick or a rock or a twig that's broken off of a tree. That doesn't have any life in it any longer, right? Now, life is shown principally by 2 actions, knowledge and movement. Okay, knowledge would be the epistemology, the study of knowledge that we've talked about a lot already. The philosophers of old, not being able to rise above their imagination, supposed that the principle of these actions was something corporeal. Okay, the principle was a body, for they asserted that only bodies were real things. Now that is actually such a now that it is actually such a body, it owes to some principle which causes its act. All right. Therefore, the soul, which is the first principle of life, is not a body, but the act of a body. Thus, heat, which is the principle of calefaction, is not a body, but an act of a body. Okay. We all know the difference between a corpse and a living human being. Okay. There's something different there. One of them has life and one of them doesn't. Okay. Anything that's dead, or the difference between a rock and a caterpillar. Okay. One of them has life, and that's what Thomas is getting at here. All right, then he goes on to say in the second article of question number 75, whether the human soul is something subsistent. Okay, and here's the definition of subsistence. Something that exists or continues in existence. And that second part there is the key. Does the soul continue in existence once the person or the animal dies? Okay, that's what he's going to say here, is the human soul subsistent. It must necessarily be allowed that the principle of intellectual operation, which we call the soul, is a principle both incorporeal and subsistent. Okay, this is very important. Therefore, the intellectual principle, which we call the mind or the intellect, has an operation per se apart from the body. Now, only that which subsists can have an operation per se. All right, so this means that when we die, okay, the intellect, the soul, has got to live on. Otherwise, we're done. Okay, and that's what Thomas would say about the rattlesnake or the caterpillar or the bird. Okay, when it's done, and the soul is finished, just like the body is, right? The ancient philosophers made no distinction between sense and intellect and referred both a corporeal principle, as he already mentioned. But Aristotle held that of the operations of the soul, understanding alone is performed without a corporeal organ. Now, this is where it gets interesting because we know that we have a brain. Most people would say that understanding, intellect, is operated by the brain. But Aristotle and Thomas is saying, no, that's not the case. Because otherwise, when we die and we go brain dead, that would be the end of the story. But we know through our faith that we continue on. And that's what Thomas is wrestling with here, right? Okay, and hence it is clear that the sensitive soul has no per se operation of its own, and that every operation of the sensitive soul belongs to the composite, okay, matter and form, remember the composite. Wherefore we conclude that as the souls of brute animals have no per se operations, they are not subsistent, for the operation of anything follows the mode of its being. So just a little bit of review. Which of these have subsistent souls? Well, only one of these creatures, and these are all creatures, has a subsistent soul, and that's that woman, okay? The angel doesn't have a soul because the angel doesn't have a body. The rock doesn't have a soul because it doesn't have life. The bird, the tulip, the grasshopper, and the rattlesnake have souls, sensitive souls, but they're not subsistent because they don't have understanding. They don't have reason. They're not rational souls, okay? That concludes our first lesson on human nature. I hope you enjoyed that. There's a lot more to come, and there's a lot of things to dig and discuss and study on St. Thomas's treatment on the human person. Okay, so we're really just getting started. Thank you so much for watching. Comment, like, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. And we'll see you for the next video on human nature according to St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa. This is St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. I'm Dave Palmer. God bless you.